All right, in Photoshop 2020, we're going to be working on chapter 14. You guys have been talking, and I know with Mary and in all of our classes, about the difference between RGB and CMYK. CMYK is process color, how we do commercial prints. RGB is the color space that we have on our monitor, and RGB is the bigger of the color spaces, right? So you can get way more colors with light because you can get the neons and the brights and the whatever. So when we design, it's important that you probably not share, if you share your files digitally with a client, remind them that what they see on their computer screen is not exactly how it will reproduce on paper, because it's made with light, it's brighter, the whites are whiter, everything looks better than it will ultimately on paper. And you guys have seen that when you've made prints, you're looking at your screen, it looks great, and especially printing to the old Rico, it would look a lot different. I mean, the paper that we have on stock is just basic white copy paper, nothing fantastic. So as you move ahead, and this spring we're going to get some different paper qualities, so we'll have some heavier cardstock, some more glossy matte, different kinds of paper that we can load in there for different outcomes. So no matter what you're doing, there's some things you should always think about. The final destination, where is this going? Is it only going to the printer in somebody's office so they can make copies of it on demand, or is it going to a commercial printer for, you know, really nice output on heavier glossy paper? Knowing your final destination is going to help you set up your document and work with it correctly. For print, we want to do 300 DPI, high resolution. Allow for a zoom test. So they're saying kind of zoom in and look around and make sure that everything looks right to you before you send it off to the printer. If you're looking at it in a smaller format, things are going to look good. But if you look at it at 100% or even zoom in a little bit, you might see some problem areas. So a zoom test is kind of a good final step. Allow for bleeds. So in Photoshop, we can allow for bleeds by extending the canvas size and then extending the part that needs to bleed off on the canvas, not on the image size. Typically, just to be clear, you're not doing a lot in Photoshop for commercial print. You would probably do that in InDesign, where you bring your photos and your text all together to do commercial print things out of that. Photoshop is not typically, it's only for photos per se, and yes, those need to be commercially output as well, but if you're doing something that requires bleeds, you're probably doing it in InDesign or maybe Illustrator anyway. Keep the image in its original color space until your service provider tells you what to do. So more and more now, they're saying, send us the RGB file. We'll convert it to CMYK based on the output settings that our machines need. We know what we're doing. Just send us RGB. If they want a CMYK file, at the very end, you do the file and you switch it over to the CMYK color space and send them that. But you always ask them. If you're working with a commercial printer, ask them, what do you want? What should I give you? Do you want a PSD? Do you want a PDF? Do you want a Photoshop EPS? Do you want native files? What color space do you want? And whatever they tell you, trust that they know what they're going to do with it at the end, and they're going to make the right conversions. Consider flattening large documents, but consult with your production team first. So again, I wouldn't necessarily send them a 200 megabyte PSD file with all the different layers when things could go wrong. I would maybe send them a flattened TIFF of the final product so that nothing can shift, nothing can be edited. And again, that's something you would want to ask them. But what you don't want to do is flatten down your image and hit save and have it overwrite your PSD as a flat image. Then you can never go back and make edits. So you would do a save as and give it a name. I usually put the word flat or something like that in the name of the file so I know that it's not the layered one, and then it's easier to find when I'm looking. And soft proof, which means make a print to your local printer to kind of get a look at it. All right, let's go to chapter 14 in our book files. I don't have a scroll on here. And open up the Start PSD. And it's an 1117 poster that is more or less done and ready for us to look at. So let's do a file, save as, Save it wherever you would like and name it your name and then Paris. And it's going to save it as a PSD file. All right, first thing we want to do, if you got this from somebody, maybe you're a senior designer and this is what your junior designer sent and they think it's ready to roll, we're kind of going to look at it from that standpoint, because these other things, if you're the one creating the file from the start, you've already looked at these issues and set them up. You've already corrected photos as you go along. So let's just say somebody gave us this and said, it's ready to go. Now we're going to kind of check it and make sure it really is. First thing we want to do is check our image size. So go under image size, or Command Option I, and is this high res? Yep. And is this 11 by 17? You need to change the measurement in the drop down from pixels to something else to double check. Yep, the actual image itself is 1117. So we have those two things going for us. So we'll say okay to that. Then they talk about doing that zoom test and looking closely at various parts of the image. So we're going to take our zoom tool and we're just going to zoom into this lower part of the image, the lower third, where we have the different pictures kind of in here. And use your hand tool to kind of move around, take a look at them, see if they look good or if there's anything you might want to do. The picture of the tourist, so it's the layer that's called tourist over here in your layer panel, could use a little tweaking. And again, if this is your file from the start, you're adjusting these pictures as you go. You're making these improvements as you go. So we're kind of working on this backwards. So we're going to improve the tourist layer by adding a curves adjustment layer to it. So up in your adjustment panel up here with the tourist layer already highlighted, we want to do a curves adjustment layer. So we can click on that. And that brings up our curves adjustment. And we want to clip it just to the tourist layer below. So there's two ways of doing that. You guys know you can hover between the two layers, hold down Option or Alt and click. Or up in the curves panel, you can click below the curve itself. There's some icons and you can click on that first one and clip it to just the layer below. So now it's affecting only the tourists. So there's two different ways of doing that. And now because it's only affecting that layer, we want to use our white eyedropper and try to brighten this up a little bit. So we're going to sample some of the white, and they're saying to use the white in the building way behind here to let that kind of blow out to even brighter white, but it kind of brightened up the entire image. So the white sample point, sample in there. Definitely brightened it up, a little flat, so we're going to, no, this one's fine, sorry. We brightened this one up exactly where we wanted. If we move over with our hand tool, this image of the statue is a little flat, so we're going to improve that one. These are things that you would just be scrolling around and looking and thinking, could I improve that? Yep, okay, I'm going to go to that layer, the statue layer, and we're going to put a levels adjustment on this one. So you can always go down through the adjustments down here, or you can go up to your adjustment panel and click on levels and then clip it to just the statue below. Otherwise, as of right now, it's affecting every single layer below it. We want to clip it to just the statue layer. And something interesting, do you guys see to the left of the levels panel, there's a levels and then kind of a little exclamation point and a triangle right here? If you hover over that, eventually it's going to say something. Calculate a more accurate histogram. These histograms are kind of cached. You guys know what that is? Like when you go to a website, it kind of remembers it so it can pull it up quickly. It's cached memory and you're not necessarily seeing the latest data. So if we click on that, it will for sure give us the histogram of that layer, not just a cached version that may or may not be correct. So whenever you see that little warning sign, you can click on it to get an updated histogram. And then they just kind of want us to improve this to get it a little bit more contrast, not quite as flat. You can pull around the sliders to your liking, or you can follow the numbers that they used in the book. They pulled all the way over to 31 on this black point, which is way inside of the foothills. And then on the white point, they pulled to a 235. Whoops, not that one, I'm in the wrong zone. Right here, a 235, which is also in quite a ways. And then they just tweaked this midpoint a little bit to 1.6. And if you ever wonder if you've done anything, remember there's that eyeball down at the bottom so you can see before and after. Okay. All right, let's hit save. Save this file at this point. And now we're going to look at the color management. So let's just zoom back out so we can see the whole entire image. And then go to a layer that doesn't have a adjustment on it, so it really doesn't matter which one, the Eiffel Tower, the background, whatever. What color space are we currently working in, and how can you find that out real quickly without even clicking anything?
RGB.
Yep, and where'd you find that?
It's in the title.
Yep, that's the quickest way to look. Up here in the title, you can see that we're in the RGB color space. So ultimately this is going to commercial print, and we're going to want to switch that. So the different gamuts, there are colors that we can see on our screen produced by light that cannot be reproduced in print. Not as vibrantly as we see. We can get some pretty similar results, but not quite as vibrantly as we see. So, so even if our monitor is calibrated and we know that our output is going to work well with our printer, we're not always, when we preview colors, we always have to do a little bit of making sure that what we see on the screen is the best representation of how we're going to output it so that we can see problem areas. So first thing we're going to do is go up to Edit, and then we're going to choose Color Settings, just down here towards the bottom. And the default right now is North American General Purpose 2. And as you hover over these different workspaces and color managements, you get descriptions down here. So as we hover over the workspace of RGB being the sRGB, IEC, yada, 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 in the description, it tells us that this is the average CRT display. This standard space is endorsed by many hardware and software manufacturers and is becoming the default color space for many scanners, low-end printers, and software applications. Ideal for web work, but not recommended for pre-press. So as we hover over these different things, it tells you. So I kind of want you to look around and hover over them and look at the description. Does anybody know what dot gain refers to? So when we print ink, it's dots per inch. It's dots of ink that's laid down. How much the ink spreads out or gains depends on paper quality that you're printing on. So if you guys were printing on a really glossy high-end paper versus newspaper, which one do you think is going to let the ink bleed out more into it? Which one? Just guess from anything you've maybe done at home. Have you ever dropped a splash of water on newspaper? Does it stay tiny or does it seep out? Does it gain? It gains, right? Because the newspaper is really porous. It's not tightly packed. So if we were to put 300 dots per inch on newspaper and it spreads out, you get a globby, gloopy mess. So you don't actually print at that exact same quality when you print to newspaper. If you're doing an ad for a newspaper, they're going to know what to do or how to take it down so there's not so much bleed. So the general purpose, these are all the different options that show up. All right, we are going to make a custom one. We're gonna fire up a different one. So in the top part under settings, when you click on the drop down, you see a whole bunch of different options: European, Japanese, and North American. North American newspaper, let's just go to that one. You have a dot gain of 25%. And the way the CMYK is handled is a different newsprint right here. Quality color separations under newsprint stock, a whole different thing. The one that we want to choose is North American Pre-Press 2. So choose that one. And then notice that a few things changed. Our RGB working space changed from that long IEC ... business to just be Adobe RGB. So this provides a fairly large gamut of RGB colors and is well suited for documents that will be converted to CMYK. Use this space if you need to do print production work with a broad range of colors. Perfect. Dot gain is still at 20%. So that's the one we want, North American Pre-Press, and we're going to say OK. Now what we want to do is see what of these colors in the RGB color space are actually out of gamut, meaning they can't be produced with ink. They don't exist as an ink color. They're too bright or vibrant for that. So fit your image on the screen if it isn't already, and then in the View menu, we're going to choose, the third one down, Gamut Warning. Wherever we see this flat gray, that's warning us that those colors are out of gamut and are not going to print as we expected. You guys see a problem? Kind of a big one. Beyond the sky, do you see it anywhere else where things turn gray? Some of this text is out, sky, some parts of the statue got kind of funky. So this, if we were to show our client just the screen, it's not going to print exactly the same way. So that's kind of an issue. This gray color can be kind of hard to see in some areas. It was obvious in the sky, but maybe down in these pictures down here, we didn't necessarily notice. That's the default color to show what's out of gamut, but we can change that. So under Photoshop, up here in the menu, we're going to go to our preferences. So Photoshop preferences, and then we're going to come down halfway to transparency and gamut. If you're on a PC, you actually have to go under edit preferences. It's just a little bit different, but we go to transparency and gamut. And at the bottom where it says color, this is our choice to show what it is. So we're going to click on that color swatch, and we're going to click a color that is wacko that's really going to show up. I'm going to pick this like neon-y green and have that be my gamut color warning. Oh, please don't stall out just because I'm being difficult. The rest of you can hit OK. And it's a lot easier to see what's out of gamut now versus that gray, right? It should be a lot easier to see it down in the statue and in the sky of that tourist picture as well. I am getting really frustrated with this workstation. That is about the easiest thing I could have asked it to do, is pick a new color. All right, now we're going to turn off that view. We're going to go back. So choose View and then Gamut Warning again to turn that off. So you're back to the blue that I have and not showing what's out of gamut. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to simulate on screen how the document colors might print, and then we're going to bring those into the actual print gamut. So how they are now, and then we're going to fix it and bring them into gamut. All right, we're going to select a proof profile so that we can view our on-screen simulation of document colors will look like when printed. And then that would allow us to print to our local printer and get a soft proof to kind of see what the colors are looking like. We're going to create a custom proof setup. So we're going to go under View, and then under Proof Setup, Custom. And we're going to move this off to the side here. Device to simulate. Under this menu, we're going to choose a profile that represents our final output device, the printer that we're going to use to print the image. So if we have it, I'm not even sure because I was working at home, we're going to look under here. What are our options? We have Coded Japan, dot gain, keep going down here, Epson's. So the SCT3000 is that printer, is it not? It's the C3000. It's not showing up for you guys?
No.
Oh. wonder why I have it then. Huh. Well, the good news is we're not going to worry about it too much because we're not going to print this anyway in class. But do you see all these different things that have come up? So if I knew I was printing to this Epson printer on photo paper gloss 2540, that was the paper I was going to put in, that would be the one I would choose. If I knew I was printing it on semi-gloss photo paper, I would choose this one. If I knew I was going to a Kodak printer that my service provider had and could make me a soft proof just instantly without any work, and they said, do it to the Kodak Theater Preview 2 or whatever, they would tell you which one to use. But it's your local printer, or, thankfully there's an or, if it's not in there, use the default one up at the top. The working CMYK US web-coded swap version 2. That's the generic version, so that's the one that you would choose if your printer isn't available in there. If you've chosen a different one, which we didn't do, and this preserved numbers happen to be turned on, we would want to turn it off, but it's off by default with this generic one. The rendering intent needs to stay where it is at the default here, relative color metric. This determines how the color is converted from one color space to another. This one preserves the color relationship without sacrificing color accuracy. This is the standard version. So again, if you don't have an exact device to output to, keep it at this working CMYK option right here. All right. And then we're going to go look down here. There's some display options for on-screen. So how it's going to look on-screen. We're going to select the simulate black ink. And what happened to our image? Got a little less contrasty, right? We kind of lost some of the pure blacks. Deselect that and choose the option above it, simulate paper color. Notice by default, the black ink version also got turned on but grayed out. When you turn on the paper, it automatically does that one. So the image loses contrast. This paper color that we just selected simulates the dingy white of real paper, according to whatever proof profile we picked. So we picked the generic one. Maybe I had printed or selected a high gloss premium paper, and there's different brightnesses of white paper. You guys have seen that, I'm sure, just loading a copy machine with different paper from different reams. All of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, this paper's so much whiter. You can get brightness options of paper when you're buying paper, and when you're printing commercially, they're going to be a lot better than this paper that we use here in class. So this is simulating on screen kind of the dinginess of paper, which is kind of sad. It also simulates the dark gray that most printers actually do produce, other than solid black that we get to see on our screen. Don't be alarmed. I do like this sentence in here. Don't be alarmed by the loss of contrast and saturation that you may see, or you did. It does look worse, but the soft proofing is just being honest about how the image will actually print. Paper and ink cannot reproduce what we see on our screen. Choosing a higher quality paper stock and higher quality inks can help make it look better and better. So this is probably pretty realistic as to what we get out of here versus if we went with a commercial printer. There's a preview button here. You can toggle that on and off and see the difference. Printed versus not printed. However we do this, with our preview on, we're going to say okay and actually apply that. All right, the next step that we're going to do is bring all those colors into gamut. So all of that blue up there, and even the reds and some other parts in the image, are not in gamut. They're going to print differently, less vibrantly. So we need to bring those into gamut. So that we can compare, we're going to make a copy of this, and we're going to have two different versions up on our screen in a split screen so that we can see what we're doing. So right now we're going to choose, let's save it for one thing. Let's be safe here and do a file save if you need to. And then do an image duplicate. And it says, what do you want to call it? So Brenda Paris copy is fine. Say okay. And now we have two tabs open and we want to show them side by side. So remember, we can do that in the arrange space. So under window, arrange, we can do 2 up vertical, and that's going to put them side by side for us. So the copy is over here on the left and the other one is over here on the right. The copy one doesn't appear to have the proof setups. That's the normal image, and then the one on the right is the one that's simulating the paper dinginess and the black ink dinginess. Select our original one, not the copy, so the one that's kind of dingy, to make sure it's active. And then we're going to go down and select the Visit Paris layer in the Layers panel. And we're going to do Select and then Color Range. Then we want to see not the sampled colors, but we want to see all of the out of gamut colors. So we're going to come over here and click on out of gamut. So it's kind of making a mask for us. Everything that's black is fine. Everything that's white is out of gamut. And then we're going to say okay. And because of that, it did a nice job of making the marching ants for us and selecting all of the areas that are out of gamut. While we're working, sometimes seeing these marching ants can be really irritating. We don't want to deselect the marching ants, we just want to hide them from our view temporarily. So under View, there's an option called Extras, and it's Command H, which is kind of convenient if you think of it as hide. So click on that and it's going to hide your marching ants, but they're not actually gone. Everything is still selected. Then we're going to make a hue saturation adjustment layer on this because we need to basically bring down the saturation. So find your hue saturation adjustment layer and click on that. Notice we're at the very top and it's affecting everything below us, but it's masked out. So it's really only affecting the out of gamut areas. Everything that's okay is still masked out by black, which is helpful. All right, we're going to leave the hue where it is, but we're going to have to desaturate this a little bit to bring it back into gamut. So we're going to take the saturation slider and pull it down just a little bit to -14. And then we're going to drag the lightness a little bit to darken it up. We're going to go to a -2. Somewhere in there. And then we're going to go back and see if we helped this. So we're going to do View, Gamut Warning. Nothing showed up, right? Or very little. So that's good. We can turn the gamut warning back off, and then we can go either Command H to bring our marching ants back, or we can do View Extras. The duplicate file, we don't need it. We can close that one down. We don't need to save it. But here is our version that's now in gamut, and our proof is looking how it's going to look on paper and how it's going to look with black ink, which is kind of ugly. So in this exercise, we shifted the out of gamut colors into our printing gamut, the CMYK gamut, mostly by desaturating them. They were just too vivid and too bright, and the ink couldn't do that. While this is quick and easy, it's considered a very basic technique. And the higher skilled you are in this, there's other techniques you're going to use. So this is not necessarily, just desaturating something is not necessarily the super professional way of doing it. But also, unless you have a lot of really brights, really saturated neon-y colors, you're not going to often see this. So when we're done with this chapter, I'm going to have you do a quick exercise with an existing file, and we're going to see if it's out of gamut. And I don't think we'll see nearly as much. All right, then converting an image to CMYK. So we're final, we're happy with where it is. So a smart thing to do is to save a copy. So File, Save, And remember that this is your RGB version, and maybe you even want to call it RGB in the file name if that helps you identify things later. Before we move on, we're going to go over to our layers panel, and in those tabs we have channels, and we're going to look at the different channels. We're in the RGB color space, so we see the composite one up here first, but then we have a red channel, a green channel, a blue channel, and we also see our mask down there that's not turned on. So in RGB mode, there's 3 channels. We're going to switch this to CMYK now. So we're going to go up to Image, Mode, and then we're going to choose CMYK Color. Remember, this is like the last thing you do. You work in RGB as long as you can, and you switch to CMYK before you save it and send it off as a CMYK file to your printer, unless you've talked to them and they say, don't even bother, just send the RGB. So if you have to, this is where you do it, CMYK Color. Then you're going to get a warning. It may change some things. Do you want to do this? And you're going to say OK. And then it's also going to say you're going to be converting to CMYK. Did you want to do this? Yes. So OK, OK, yes, yes. So here it is. And actually looks a little bit better in my opinion. Let's do a file, save as. And here's where I would probably put CMYK right in the file name so that if I'm ever looking at them, it's obvious to me and I feel kind of more comfortable sending that on knowing that it's a CMYK. Yes, we're still in PSD format and that's not our final output, but I think it's, now we have 2 PSD files. We have one in RGB color space and one in CMYK. Do you guys remember quite a while ago when we looked at that bright purple flower and we went back and forth between the color spaces? As long as we didn't save, we could do that, but the minute we hit save, we could never go back to the RGB and get those really cool brights again because they had been discarded. So that's why we want to keep our RGB version and a CMYK version. All right, some professional printers might ask you to give you a Photoshop image in an EPS format, which is Illustrator. It's the generic version of Illustrator. It's encapsulated PostScript file. This is not nearly as common as it was a while ago, and this book is new, but it's still, it's kind of, we're going to walk through the process just in case you ever hear that. Because if you ever hear, oh, send me a Photoshop EPS, you might go, you're dumb. That's Vector. That's Illustrator. This person doesn't even know what they're talking about. Well, they do. Far more likely is they're going to have you send a print quality PDF. That's far more likely in today's day and age. But let's just walk through this EPS process. It's very simple. You do a file, save as, whoops. And in the options in the drop-down box, instead of the format being Photoshop, we've so far played around with JPEGs. A TIFF we've sort of talked about. That's a flattened image like a JPEG but no loss of quality. But notice up towards the top we have Photoshop EPS. That's the one that we want to choose. Under the color option right here, we're going to use the proof setup. We're going to turn that on. The embed color profile is going to stay with it, but we're turning on the proof setup as well. And then up here, the name is the name we had it, but now the extension is .eps. That's what we want, so we're going to say save. And in this option that pops up, accept these defaults and just say OK. And then if you wanted to confirm that it was there, you can either go to Bridge and look, or in Photoshop or wherever you could go to Open in Lesson 14. And I now see that I have an EPS file. The file size is a little bit different too. Both of these are the CMYK versions. The PSD is obviously still layers and I can edit things. It's 140-ish megs. EPS got to be a little bit smaller, 89.6. All right. Finally, printing a CMYK image from Photoshop. Normally we print a color composite, which is all 4 channels CMYK laid down at once, so we get a full color image, obviously. If we wanted to, we could print the separations. We could print one sheet of just the yellows, cyans, magentas, yellows, and then K, the black or the registration color. You could print those out as well. If you're going to print color separations straight from Photoshop, have you done this with Mary in any class for any reason? No? Okay, because I saw that she had color separations printed out once. Did she show them to you?
We went over it a little bit.
Okay.
How to do it.
Okay, so that's what this is. I'm not going to have us all queue up 4 pieces of paper for each one of us from this. So I'll walk through it. So if you're trying to print color separations from Photoshop, this is how we would do it, the basic process. Let's do a file print. I'm just going to do this, or you can walk through it. Just don't actually hit print, because like I said, we don't all need to print these out. And again, we get our option of where we're sending it to. In the color management area, under the color handling, instead of printer manages colors, Photoshop manages colors, this is where we have separations. That's the 4 different plates. We would choose that. We would go down and verify that we have an 1117 document, but because we're just soft proofing this on this machine and we can't have bleeds, it's always best to hit scale to fit media, so that, because here's the version without, that doesn't look too good. Now at least it scales it down. This is only on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, but it's scaling it down to do a soft proof on that. So you could choose to do an 1117 soft proof also, but whenever you hit scale to fit media, it's going to shrink down. And then we would hit print, and it would kick out 4 different versions of that. So I'm going to hit cancel. Let's do a file save if we need to. The last part is kind of interesting in this chapter. It's the extra credit, but it talks about using the Adobe portfolio, which is something you have access to. And it's kind of worth looking at right now in your first term of your first year, because you haven't had web classes yet, you haven't made a portfolio yet, and maybe you want to start just assembling some pieces and share them with people. So this is a free option through your subscription, is to use this My Portfolio. So let's close the file that we just did. This is the CMYK version. Would we share that one on the web? Because CMYK is not what web is, it's RGB. So we'd be smarter to share the RGB version of the file if that's what we wanted to do. So let's go back and open the start file. If you get this embedded profile mismatch, leave it with the option that came up and say OK. And we're going to export this to use on the web. So we've kind of done this already, where we've talked about making a little bit more web-friendly, lower resolution, smaller file size. So we're going to choose File and then Export. Where'd you go? Up here. Export. Export as. And because this is a big high-res file, it might take a little while for it to generate here for us. Here's our original JPEG at 3000 or 3300 by 5100. It's 10 megs. This is very ginormous, obviously. So we do want it to be a JPEG over here. Remember, there's only the web formats are options: JPEG, GIF, SGV, and a PNG. So JPEG, and then we're going to take the quality down a little bit to make it a little bit smaller file size, but not noticeably worse. They're saying 90% in the book. And then the physical size, we're definitely going to change. We don't need it to be this ginormous. We're going to change the height, which is the tallest of the two, to be 918 pixels. And then if you hit Tab, everything else scaled proportionately with it. Down at the very bottom where it says color space, we're going to select the one that says convert to sRGB, and we're going to embed the color profile, both of those. This is going to help ensure consistent color on different web browsers. And then we're going to say export. So we're taking that huge PSD and we're making a much smaller JPEG. And when it pops up here, just call it Paris Web maybe, or something like that. I like to put keywords in my file name sometimes just to make it even easier when I'm looking for which one I'm wanting to update. Sometimes I put the word web in, or I put in OPT for optimize so that I know it's the web version. All right, so that's the one that we're going to put online. Let's now everybody go online to Google and we're going to type in myportfolio.com. And this is part of your Adobe family, Adobe Portfolio. So at the top right, we see sign in. Go ahead and sign in to your account. I was practicing this so my screen looks a little different. So I'm going to look over your shoulder. So we have a gallery of your work or a splash page. What do you want to create? You want to create the gallery of your work, so the one on the left. Hopefully this is going to look similar. Oh, there we go. And you get to choose a theme. So this is a lot like WordPress that you're going to learn next semester, or no, next year. Just so we're all on the same page, you can change these, but Lena is the one that the book is using, just so we have the same page. And once you've done that, there is a button down here for adding content, so adding a page. There's also a little pencil icon, that's the edit, or there's a plus up here at the top left, and if we click on that, that's also add a page. So there's two ways to add the page, and then the edit button, there's nothing to edit yet, but if you wanted to edit it later, that's where you would do it. So we're going to click on that button, and it says, do you want to add a page, a Lightroom album from bringing photos from Lightroom? Do you want to add a gallery or a link? So we're going to say we want to add a page. And notice that on the left, there are different ways that you can choose your page layout. We're going to just keep it as the default. And then the name of the page would be descriptive. So we're going to call this one Visit Paris. And this is going to be a page option that's going to be added to the work drop-down menu, which is where you would expect it to be. Say create page. Okay, it says, what do you want to do on your page? Do you want to add an image, text, photo grid, audio, all sorts of cool stuff. We're going to say add an image. And then we're going to navigate to where we have that optimized file in lesson 14. I called mine Paris Web. I'm going to say open. There it is. And then when you, let's see here, expecting to see a plus somewhere. Up here, if we wanted to change the Visit Paris, we can click on that pencil icon, and we can say edit the page info. We can customize it, edit the page header, or let's see if this works the way I think it does. If we click on those plus signs, I'm off to the right of mine, we can add another image or some text. So I'm just going to click on text, and it's adding it over here to the right, and I'm going to say this was a class project from chapter 14, something like that. This is where you could explain it. To see how it's going to look, down at the bottom left, you have publish or preview. We can click on the preview, and eventually this is what it would look like. Obviously, the name that you have with your Adobe account is what shows up here. And then, so basically, it's kind of like a really easy WordPress site. To get out of here at the bottom, oh, also, this is kind of cool. At the bottom, you see all these different icons. This is showing you that it is mobile friendly. It has responsive design. So here's how it looks on a tablet, on, I don't know what, on a phone, or on a phone tipped that way. So it's mobile friendly. You could go back to edit or publish your site if you wanted to. If you want to publish your site, I'll just click on that and show you, oh boy, it's happening. And there is my web address that you could share with people. So if you want to start adding some of your favorite projects to this, so you have something to show to people, this is a great option for you. But as you learn more next semester, you're going to have Web Dev 1, you're going to learn basic HTML and CSS, and then next semester after that in the fall, I have you for WordPress, and we're going to build full websites. And your portfolio for this program will be built in WordPress. But it's cool. It's there. You can start adding stuff, share it with your family. Maybe you are looking for some kind of work and you're advanced enough and you want to have a portfolio to send people to. This is a pretty simple way to get there. So, any questions on the basic outputting process? The big key is to make sure that you have it at 300 dpi. If you're using Photoshop, make sure you enlarge your canvas to allow for that bleed. And then talk to whoever, if you're sending it to a commercial printer, talk to them and find out exactly what format and color space they want it in. And then there's no guessing. It's all good. All right. Okay,